Welcome back. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is to reflect a little bit on the narrative of the Ark of the Covenant that we read about in chapters 4 through 6. These chapters focus on the Ark of the Covenant against the backdrop of the demise of the house of Eli and the rise of a new judge prophet, young Samuel. And note carefully that as this episode opens, Israel's feeling threatened by the Philistines once again, and absent the annotation that the Lord raised up a deliverer, Israel moves its forces to within 3 miles of the Philistine encampment at Aphek. And when the Philistines respond, the Israeli forces break and lose 4,000 of their fighters on the battlefield. Well, when the survivors reach the home base, Israel's leaders are just flabbergasted. Listen to them ask, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines?" In chapter 4, verse 3. And the solution they offer in the very next breath is to take the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord with them the next time they face off with the Philistines. Well, Miller and Roberts demonstrate that at this point, the Ark was to Israel's leaders essentially no different than a divine statue in Mesopotamian cultures. And as you read on in chapter 4, the Philistines' response indicates that they share that ancient Near Eastern superstition. Well, the point of the Ark narrative here in 4 through 6 is to demonstrate the power, not of the box, but of Yahweh, whose presence and power it was supposed to remind his people and witness to the watching world. Remember back in Joshua 4, verses 18 to 24, they're reminded that the ark was the visible symbol of God's powerful personal presence. And this was meant to be a witness so that all the people of this country would know that the hand of the Lord was mighty. Well, the second battle went worse than the first. This time Israel loses 30,000 battlefield casualties. Look at verse 10. And there's at least one casualty at home base. Their judge, Eli. He was so distraught, he fell backwards off his bench and broke his neck and died. Well, turn the camera on the Philistine camp. Can you imagine the theological conversations the victorious Philistines were having? See, as tragic as this is in Israel, the narrator takes care to highlight the important point. And that is that while misplaced faith is dangerous, it doesn't change the character and the purpose of God. You see, as tragic as this is in Israel, the narrator takes care to highlight the important point. And that is that while misplaced faith is disastrous, it doesn't change the character and purpose of God or the proper locus of saving faith. See, the narrator points out that while the symbol's not the real thing, it still represents the real thing, and the Philistines are learning that as they set it up in the temple of Dagon in Ashdod, subservient before their God. And when they went into the temple the next morning, the great Philistine god was in a penitential posture. Check out Joshua 7:6. He's in a penitential posture, face down in front of the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh. Well, that'll never do. So they set Dagon back up on his pedestal where he reigned happily ever after until that night. Because early the next morning, the Philistines go into the temple again, and this time, Dagon's not only done a faceplant before the Ark of Yahweh, but Dagon literally disintegrated. And chapter 5, verse 6 reports that the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod, and the Philistines recognized the power of Yahweh, and they agree, we need to get this out of the town of Ashdod. Because they said, his hand is heavy upon us, and on Dagon, our God. Chapter 5, verse 7. So, they FedEx it to Gath, another of the premier Philistine cities, but that was a disaster. So they forwarded to Ekron, and same song, third stanza. And so, after 7 months of one fiasco after another, finally they conclude it's got to go back to Israel. So they pack it up along with a guilt offering, chapter 6, verse 3, and send it on its way. So, you see, the narrator follows up on that statement of purpose back in Joshua chapter 4, that the Gentiles would know the power of Yahweh. And he shows that indeed they do. And so, chapter 7 reports that the ark makes it up into the mountains of Judah, where it's stored in a garage in Kiryat Yearim for decades until David has it transferred to Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 6. We'll see that later. It seems to me that some teaching points of this subplot would include that Yahweh alone is God, and he will not be objectified or manipulated. That covenant relationship with and flourishing in that covenant relationship is always and only on his terms. It teaches that in the face of reversals, some may conclude that Yahweh is insignificant and unable to help, but they'd be mistaken, as the residents of Ashdod and Gath and Ekron and Beit Shemesh would testify. No one but God himself rescues the ark from the enemy. Think about it. We'll see you in a bit.